There's no speech. There are no words. Their message is not heard, and yet their message has gone out to the whole earth, and their words to the ends of the world. I remember one time very many years ago, I went to the planetarium in St. Louis, which was where I grew up, and the planetarium was a very common place for us to go. And in the planetarium, one of the things that was a highlight, back in those days, this was a brand new thing. We'd not seen this before, but these massive screen movie theaters that nowadays are fairly common. But in those days, this was a very, very unusual and new thing, this OmniMax theater. And I remember one of the first time I ever saw an OmniMax movie was at this planetarium in St. Louis. And the opening scene of this particular movie started out, and you didn't exactly know what it was, but you understood enough that it was on a microscopic level. And you were looking at a microscopic level, and there were these, looks like little, I don't know, cells, and stuff was moving in the cells and all this just, little bitty tiny stuff. And then it kind of zoomed out, and it showed that it was inside of a leaf. And then it zoomed out and it showed a plant. And it zoomed out and it showed a plot of ground. It zoomed out and it showed a big piece of ground. It zoomed out and suddenly you were probably 20,000 feet in the air, and it was a whole region. And then it zoomed out and you began to see a whole portion of the earth and a big part of the continents. And it zoomed out and then it was mostly ocean with a little continent on one side. And then it zoomed out and you saw the whole planet. And then it zoomed out and you saw the moon kind of zip by. And then it zoomed out and you get the picture. And it just went out and out and out and out and out and out. And it was just one of these things where, here I was, probably a 11, 12-year-old kid, just absolutely mesmerized by the scale of this. As we went from super, cellular level to grand scale of cosmic proportions. And even then, it occurred to me, God made all that. Just, boom. It just as easy as me and you having a thought. As easy as me and you, like I often picture, the ease with which I can pick up dust, pick up sand at the ocean and just kind of fling it. And to God, that's throwing entire galaxies out into existence. It's just an amazing thought. The heavens declare the glory of God. A couple of things that brings to mind for me. One of them is from Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 26. It talks about how God knows every star by name. We don't even know where all the stars are. We don't even know all the galaxies that are out there, let alone the stars. The one galaxy that we know a little bit about is the galaxy we're a part of, the Milky Way galaxy, and it is astronomically big. Just this one little galaxy that we live in is stupendous. Something to the effect of, if you were able to travel at the speed of light, which you're not, if you were able to travel at the speed of light, it would take you 100,000 years, Earth years, to get all the way across just our own Milky Way. And that is a tiny galaxy in a sea of galaxies. It is astronomical to think about this. And then God goes off to say things like, He knows my name. He knows your name. He knows how many hairs are on Clark's head. He knows how many hairs are on my head, but that's not really hard. He knows you. He knows me. The God who cast into existence this absolutely mind-boggling universe that we live in knows when I have a hard day, knows the challenges that keep me up at night, knows the time I feel really good and excited about stuff and is happy for me. Knows the times that I'm really sad and wants to make a difference for me. That's a pretty impressive thing. I hope that tonight will be one of those beautiful, clear nights that we often get here in Central Ohio, where we can, before we go to bed, maybe look up at those stars and see them and recognize that they are so many hundreds of thousands of miles away and so incredibly large. And there are so many of them that we'll never see, and that God that created all of that wants you to have a good night's sleep, listens to your nighttime prayers, and has concern for what your day will hold tomorrow. What an amazing thought. What a wonderful thought that is. Yes. I do. I saw it. We're going to go through a couple of prayer requests and some announcements just to keep in front of you. Our Easter egg hunt is coming up very soon. If you haven't done so yet, there are eggs out I know you haven't done so because I've seen the eggs out there. If there are eggs out there to be filled, if you could help us with that, we'd appreciate it. We have tons and tons of kids that come and get eggs. And so if you can take a bag of those eggs, if you can fill those and bring those back, that's a huge help. If you don't have time to do all that and you just want to donate some money, Donnie can take that. If you want to just bring candy, we'll have volunteers that'll stuff that. Best case scenario, take them, fill them, bring them back. Short of that, we'll take donations, we'll take candy, and we'll be very, very grateful for it. We want to keep in mind that we do have some events coming up. We have the junior youth activity is this Friday night. This Friday night is here at the building. Dinner is provided. I think it's like a game night kind of thing. Very excited about that and looking forward to that. So keep that in your mind. I got a note here just a little bit ago on text from Kathy Adkins, who couldn't be here this evening, but she asked us to keep in prayer Karen Jones. Karen Jones is her cousin's wife, and she is in the hospital. Didn't go into detail as to what exactly the problem was, but a very serious situation. So let's keep Karen Jones in our prayer. And Scott, you had an announcement. Why don't you share that? Hey.
There will be quartet, hymnal singing, camp, free time. Just come up and enjoy it, see it. You want to see recent pictures? Jessica's up there today. Thank you for his hard work. He sent them to me, so we have pictures of the lodge if you'd like to see.
Awesome. And you said that's May 17th,
From
noon
noon to 4.
to 4. Beautiful. Thank you. Very exciting. Boy, I know a lot of people are very excited about seeing that come together, as we all are, all of us that enjoy camp. So, other announcements, updates, anything that you would like us to keep in prayer? Events going on that I'm forgetting to mention? Important details that I need to be sharing? Okay. Royal, why don't you come lead us in a prayer, and then we will have our closing song and head out to class.
Will you pray with me? Dear God, I hope that you be with the people that are sick, and I hope that you be with people that are in the hospital, and I just thank you for letting us all be here today, and I just hope that you be with the people who have lost loved ones and stuff like that. And I hope that you help us to have a good rest of the night. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. 646. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when the face shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. You are dismissed to class.
Okay. Okay, move that down a little bit. You don't need to hear every time I breathe. Yeah. So I'll be obviously teaching tonight. I didn't just stand up here for nothing. We're going to be continuing our series on mountains in the Bible, and they gave me a really good one. This is a pretty big one. It's probably one of the biggest events of the Old Testament, and Angie and I were talking about this on the way here tonight. I don't know about you. Some people might think it's corny, but I really like the Charlton Heston movie, The Ten Commandments, right? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And Angie actually bought me that DVD for our first Christmas ever because I said I liked it. She bought it for me. She wouldn't watch it with me, though. Yeah. It is long, but I'll try to get it all in one 30-minute class tonight instead of the 2 hours or whatever, that 2.5, 3 hours that movie is. So, one of the opening thoughts I had here tonight was, this is a time where you got the directions, right? And I remember a time where if you lost an important set of directions, you couldn't just go find them on the internet anymore. And sometimes, if you had a complex, I don't know, whatever, and if you lost the directions, you just had to either figure it out yourself or you were totally lost. So there's a lot of points in our lives where receiving clear directions make a really big difference. I don't know about you, but there's also a time, some of us probably remember, when you didn't have directions on your phone, and some people could give you really good directions to get to a place, and some people could not. And when we grew up, our farm was on the very top of a hill, and there was a water tower, so it was very easy to give people good directions. You could say, we'll drive up this road, you'll see the water tower, and after you drive past the water tower, you'll turn down this gravel road. That's where our farm was. And so sometimes it was some directions were easy to give to people, sometimes directions are hard and complex. And tonight we're going to look at a time when God's people were given good directions. So we're going to be looking in Exodus chapter 19 and 20 tonight. And I didn't realize this until, and there's always, when you're asked to teach a class, you kind of dig a little deeper and you feel a little responsible. One of the things I didn't realize is just how soon it was from when the Israelites had left Egypt to when they got the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. And I went and looked at Mount Sinai. If you look at the sort of the Gulf that goes up by Africa, the Red Sea there, there's a little peninsula that comes out, and it's just right there. So it kind of makes sense geographically. You kind of look at, okay, yeah, it's right across from the Red Sea. And so, but the Egyptians had only left Egypt 3 months ago. So that's like the first thing it says in chapter 19. In the third month after the Israelites went out from the land of Egypt, on the very day, they came to the desert of Sinai, and it says they kind of set up their camp in front of the mountains. So they had just left, and I think for God's people, it's not just a geographical landmark like hey, go to the water tower, turn here. It's really also just a theological landmark as well. So we have this big turning point from, these people have lived in slavery for all this time, and they are saved, and now they're going from being saved, being delivered, to being disciples. And, think of some of these big moments in your life, like a graduation ceremony or a wedding vow. It's kind of like a new chapter in your life. This mountain, Sinai, is a new chapter in the story of God's people. And so I just have a question, and I don't have the answers. I just thought about this as we went through, and I jotted it down. Why do you think God gave the law to his people after he had saved them from bondage? Like, why do you think the deliverance and salvation came first, salvation from slavery, and then the law came? I do not have any answers here at all. But, if you think about it, he could have easily kind of announced these 10 laws to his people right before they crossed, sometime while they were in bondage, right when they left, after the 10 plagues and all that. But he set them free first, got them across the Red Sea, and kind of totally saved them, and then he gave them the law. I see your hand there. Go ahead. Yeah, I suppose so. Is that, if he wanted? I think if he wanted to, he could have. So let's dig a little deeper than that. Josh, are you giving me away?
Maybe after the past 3 months or 4 months of being in Egypt and all, the hearts were pretty softened. What they see God has done on the
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, let's just hit pause. Think 3 months ago, that was around the New Year, right? So most of us, if I said, hey, what'd you do for the holidays? You probably have a pretty good memory. Now, if I said, what'd you do for the holidays in 1999, you might go, I don't remember that one as well. So their memory is very fresh. I guess 3 months, I can kind of remember where I was 3 months ago, at least some of the big events, and I can remember them kind of with some detail. And so if you think about all the things they said, we've mentioned a few. You got the plagues. You got, Pharaoh kind of going back and forth. Moses negotiating with him. And certainly these people, they just walked through the Red Sea sometime in the last 3 months. So they have all that fresh in their head. And you think that maybe readied them? Is that kind of where you're going with that? Anyone else have a thought on it? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Did you have one? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there were rules for slaves and things like that, but, you're exactly right, Max. It's for the first time they're on their own, and they really didn't have much direction yet. I'm going to tell the story of a hymn that I think kind of fits this. I think a lot of people, we talk about salvation versus knowing the plan, right? I think a lot of people really sometimes delay their conversion because they say, well, I just don't know enough yet. I have to have this completely figured out. And if sometimes we sing this song called Trust and Obey, you guys know that one, right? The story of how that song was written, I don't remember the names or anything, but the hymn writer was inspired by this event where someone was at some sort of gospel invitation. He said, I don't know much about everything you said, but I'm just going to trust and obey. And he came to the Lord in that way. And sometimes I think we have to just make sure that we don't, when we're evangelizing, it's okay for someone to come to Christ and not know everything. Certainly, there are some basics, but there's some pretty deep things sometimes we get into, and you don't have to have them all figured out. And I don't think many of us have them all figured out anyway. So, I don't know. I just wanted to throw that in there. And so God's going to give his people some laws, what we call the Ten Commandments. And I want to ask you one more question before we move on to further into the text. These commandments are boundaries of things you should and shouldn't do. And they didn't have any at the time. And so how do boundaries, whether this be a theological point of view or maybe just something from life or work or whatever, how do boundaries like that, boundaries and orders, do they enhance your freedom or do they truly restrict your freedom, having boundaries? They protect you.
My word, that word of my life, they know that's my word. It's my word for the rest of my life.
Anything? Any other thoughts on that besides my wife? It's dangerous to get into it with your wife in class. I'll just tell you that right now. When you think about you're going down the road, you have some boundaries where you keep your car between some lines. If you go outside those boundaries, you can start really getting in trouble fast. And I just taught some new teenage drivers all about that and I felt much safer once they figured that out, I'll tell you that. Let's keep going here. Down in 3, Exodus 19:3, says, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain. Thus you will tell the house of Jacob and declare to the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt. We just kind of talked about this. And how I lifted you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And now, if you will diligently listen to me and keep my covenant, then you will be my special possession. Out of all the nations on the earth is mine, and you will be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words that you will speak to the Israelites. So we don't have the commandments yet, but God's starting to talk to his people through Moses. So starting in 7, Moses came and summoned the elders of Israel. He set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him, and all the people answered together, all that the Lord has commanded, we will do. So Moses brought the words of the people back to the Lord. I'm getting a little ahead here. So in this section here, God starts talking about his people, and he gives them a couple different descriptive names here. He says they're his treasured possessions, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. I think all of these kind of point to a lot of theological events that are going to unfold in the story of God's people as it's recorded both in the Old and New Testament. There is a lot to unpack here. Let's talk a little bit about the one that says a kingdom of priests. I read a little bit about how that could be interpreted, and I don't want to get too into that, but let's just stop and define what a priest is in this section right here. A priest is someone who kind of like at this time kind of stood for what God had to say and stood between God and his people. So if we think about what is it like for a nation to do that, I think that's what we're seeing here. So a nation of priests, these are the people that kind of prepared the world for the message of Jesus to arrive. It's kind of carried through his people, born through his people. So that's kind of how I see it. A nation of priests is kind of like the people that are going to set up and deliver God's plan to the world. They didn't always do it perfectly. They got into a lot of trouble as we read through the Old Testament, but they were constantly carrying God's plan to the world. And I don't know, any thoughts on that nation of priests or a holy nation or treasured possession that we can talk about? All right, let's look at something else in here. Down in 8, Moses told all the people these things, and then the people said, we will obey. Okay? How long after the 10 Commandments came down off the mountain was it before they were disobeying? Yeah, it wasn't very long, okay? So, when we look at the yes, we'll obey to the golden calf not being much later, I just want to talk about what does that really tell us about, I guess, human nature, or how God deals with how God dispenses his mercy. What does that tell us? Like, people say, yes, we'll obey, and then very quickly they kind of change their mind. Say that again. I'm sorry. Okay, so he gave the law afterwards, knowing that they were going to make some mistakes. I don't know. Any other thoughts on that? I think it kind of shows that the law. I think we have to look at the law carefully. Sometimes you might, very simply. I remember when I was very, very, very little. a Sunday school teacher said, you have to follow the 10 Commandments to be saved. That's what I thought it was. And I think that person probably had good intent telling me that. But I think it's so much more than that. If you ever worked with a level, like a carpenter's level, all it can do, let's just pretend this is level, and I put my level right here. All it's going to do is tell me if it's level or if it's not level. And that's kind of what the law is like. I can let that level sit there as long as all day long, and that level is never going to make this table true. Ever going to make it true. But it is going to show me how God wants me to live. So we kind of, were you going to say something? I thought I heard somebody. All right, sorry. We kind of have to frame the law that way. It's God's covenant with His people. It's God's contract with His people. But all it can do is show us what's right and wrong, what's true. It can't ever change the table to level. So the law can't really do that. God's grace and mercy does. And I think, the people saying, yes, we're going to obey, and not long after that, they got into some trouble. I think it shows that we're going to need more than just a level. We're going to need a way to get to not just say, well, I'm out, I'm not true, I'm crooked, I'm not 90 degrees or whatever. We're going to need some way to get back right. Some other things here I want to look at real quick down in 9. So we're in 18:9. It says here, the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud so the people may hear when I speak with you, and they will always believe you. And then in 10, the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and sanctify them. Today and tomorrow make them wash their clothes and be ready for the third day. On the third day, the Lord's going to come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You must set boundaries for the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves. Do not go up on the mountain, nor touch its edge. Whoever touches the mountain will surely be put to death. No hand will touch him, but surely be stoned or shot through, whether a beast or human being. He must not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, then they may go up on the mountain. So, it talks about, I'm going to kind of paraphrase a little bit here. God basically appears with a lot of smoke, thunder, sort of a trumpet sound. And I just noticed these happen a lot when God really wants to make His presence known. We see Him in Revelation. We see Him in Isaiah 6. The angels blew trumpets at the birth of Jesus. So it kind of shows like there's a separation between man and God, and they need someone to go between man and God. In the Old Testament, it's Moses. This is kind of a foreshadowing of our need for Jesus to be an intermediary between us and God. There's a lot of God announcing His presence here. Anyone who came up on the mountain is going to be put to death. And so we see a lot about God's nature from this. I mean, He's really preparing the people to receive the law by letting them know He's actually there. I don't think there was any doubt that like God was showing up, and I think God wanted everyone to see that. I think it kind of, I don't know. I look at this and it's kind of like, so when I come to church on Sunday, how do I kind of prepare myself for how do I prepare myself for those moments where I want to draw near to God? Do I do it kind of haphazardly? Sometimes I do, and I probably shouldn't. This is God telling His people, like, if you cross any of these lines or any of these boundaries or any of these things I'm going to set up, you're going to die. And so God, I think it shows that God takes it very seriously when we approach Him to worship. You guys can break in at any time if you have something you want to share. I'm going to switch over to 20, Exodus 20. So the first 10, 11 verses of Exodus 20 are what we call the actual 10 Commandments. And so there's been probably among this group, a lot of us have studied the 10 Commandments quite a bit. So I struggle with preparing, like how do you prepare a lesson on the 10 Commandments? People have known these since they're probably little kids. Well, let's just look at them as they're here. I'm going to read them real quick, starting in 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you from the land of Egypt and the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Verse 4, you shall not make yourselves any carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water below. I looked at this really carefully and wanted to know, like, is it okay for people to, like, draw pictures and take photographs? And the way it was written here, it really only applies to things, the way the language is interpreted, it's applying to things that are worshipped, okay? Let me jump into 5. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, responding to the transgressions of fathers by dealing with children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who reject me, and showing covenant faithfulness to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Verse 7, you shall not take the Lord your God in the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold guiltless anyone who takes his name in vain. 8, verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to set it apart as holy. For 6 days you may labor and do all your work, but the 7th is to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, or your son, your daughter, your male servants, your female servants, your cattle, resident foreigners in your gates. For 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. 12, verse 12. Honor your father and mother, that you may live a long time in the land the Lord your God is giving you. 13, you shall not commit murder. 14, you shall not commit adultery. 15, you shall not steal. Verse 16, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, nor your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So let's take a look at these real quick. Most people break the commandments into sort of a vertical and a horizontal. And by vertical, we mean the relationship between man and God. So that's your first 4. And the next commandments 5 through 10 are kind of your horizontal, so our relationship to one another. I don't know. When we look at the 10 commandments, they're pretty all-encompassing. Is there any of them we want to look at a little closer, or any of them that we think that we need to talk about a little bit here tonight? Following these is not a transaction. I think that's why I kind of brought up that Sunday school teacher I remember when I was like before kindergarten. I remember that. And she kind of set it up that way. It's not a transaction. It's not if you follow these, then these, you'll get God's blessings. It's these commandments need to be relational. It's how we relate to one another. It's how we relate to God. I don't know, any discussion on any of the commandments at all? Yeah, go ahead, Dan. Right. Yeah, and I think you're bringing out what we could do with every single commandment is talk about the sort of gray areas on the side of it. And so, like, when I studied it, it was kind of like, is it right or wrong to make like a statue of Abraham Lincoln? So no, that's not wrong. He's one of our great leaders. We want to make this statue to teach people about him and to memorialize him and so on. And so I don't think anybody would say that's wrong. But I think there's faiths that like take it all the way one way and all the way the other. Like I know some of the Amish won't have any pictures hanging up in the house, don't put any faces on the dolls. They don't like to be photographed. And so I think that's the way they interpret this. So we could kind of do that with almost any of these commandments here. And, you know, I think in today's context, when we talk about adultery, we really talk about putting anything in front of God, not a statue or a picture or whatever. It could be our work or our hobbies or our... Right, it could be anything. So I think the theme I kind of want to have here is we can use these in a very, you know, they're laws, so I'm going to say we can use them very legalistically and really get into it, but they really are set up by God to be about having good relationships with Him and good relationships with one another. Yeah. Yeah, Matthew, I have it here. You know, Matthew 5, if you want to, we can turn there and look. Kind of in the second half after the Sermon on the Mount, 17. So I'm reading from Matthew 5:17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish these things, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke of a letter will pass from the law until everything takes place. So anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever obeys and teaches others to do will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness goes beyond that of the experts in the law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And he does it really well starting here. He kind of sets up this example in 21 and following. You have heard it said to an older generation, do not murder. I'm going to pause for a minute. I like how Jesus takes like pretty much the most offensive commandment. Like, you know, this is like the big one, you know. So probably one that I think, I'm pretty sure most of us have never murdered anyone here. So it's one of those like, it's one of those commandments that it's like, well, that's the easiest one for me to follow. So I'm good there. I'm real good there. I got that one. So I think Jesus picked that very wisely. You know, he could have done the lying one or the coveting one. And most people he was speaking to would probably have told a few lies or, boy, I sure would like to have that good-looking donkey over there. You know, like he said, that's the example he used. But Jesus very wisely says, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I say to you, anyone who is angry with a brother will be subject to judgment, and whoever insults a brother will be brought before the council, and whoever says fool will be sent to a fiery hell. So he's kind of setting up this. It's not enough just to follow the law. You have to truly love one another. Let's see. Am I missing anything there in the end of Matthew? You know, it's not, you have to, he also talks about go and be reconciled with your brother. So you have to go way beyond. It's just like that level. That level kind of is like, I haven't murdered. I'm real good and level when it comes to murder. So I'm okay there. It's not enough. You have to truly, the level's not going to straighten this out. You have to go get yourself straightened out with your brother here. And, you know, I think we could say that about all the commandments. So we have to take these laws very, very seriously, as Jesus teaches here. In several places in the New Testament, Paul talks about too in Romans how the law stirs us to be aware of our sin. So, you know, I just stand up here and I think about these. The laws are this very spiritual foundation, but man, it makes me thankful for grace. You know, it's just like, yes, we have these laws, but they will never ever straighten us out or make this table level. That's where we need grace to come in.
I think the biggest thing is it was trying to get the Israel people as a society together and starting out, because what they had before as slaves, they had the Egyptian, probably following under Egyptian gods. And a lot of their knowledge of that. So this way it separates them from that and gets them set up as a separate society also. And this is the norms of the society. So that way they're not trying to fight with each other and live well with each other.
Yeah, and the one thing about the Ten Commandments, some people talk about like, well, I'm trying to think of how I want to frame this. Like, oh, well, you know, there's a lot of things in the Bible they just make up that you're supposed to do or not do. Every single one of the Ten Commandments, I really don't want anyone to do those things to me. Like you know they're wrong. You know they're wrong because if someone does them to you, you're kind of like, hey, it's not right to treat me that way. Like we have this almost, God has instilled us with this sense of right and wrong. Like every single one of the commandments, like I just don't want anybody to do that to me. I don't want anybody to steal my stuff. I don't want anybody to lie about me. I don't want anybody to kill me. So we know they're right and wrong. So let me take us back to Exodus. Let's jump to Exodus 20 again, and we'll take it here at 18. Oh, I'm looking for 20:18, and I'm in 18:20. That's why I couldn't find where I was. Exodus 20:18. Sorry about that, guys. I was reading about Moses' father-in-law. I was like, I don't remember doing this. Okay, so later in chapter 20, it talks about all the people were seeing the thundering and lightning and heard the sound of the horn and saw the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they trembled with fear and kept their distance. They said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak with us lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not fear. God has come to test you that the fear of him may be before you so that you do not sin. The people kept their distance, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. And so I really kind of want to talk about, sometimes we talk about the fear of God, and I think this explains it really, really well. He says here, the fear of him may be before you so that you do not sin. And I think that sums up when we're supposed to be, we want to have a relationship with God. We can come to him in prayer. and talk to him and have a relationship with him. But I think this is what we mean when we say the fear of God. The fear of God is the fear of offending him with our sins. If you're not afraid of making God angry through your sin, then I think that's where you're going wrong with this fear of God. So this fear and this respect that we have for God is all about, this covers what I think it's about really, really well. Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, so that you do not sin. So, respecting what God has done for us enough to not cross these lines that he's made for us, to give us what he calls a more abundant life. And so I kind of want to bridge this to the New Testament. We have multiple places in the New Testament that talk about Jesus as the great mediator who brings a better covenant. And unlike Moses, Jesus eventually enters into having to intercede for us eternally through his death on the cross. So when we fear God, that should be a fear of respect and a fear of awe, but we shouldn't fear him so much that we won't want to draw near to him to have a relationship with him. And so I just don't want to confuse that fear with like dreading God. I think sometimes when we enter a state of sin, we dread coming back to God because our guilt can be so overpowering. So when we look at this story here, Jesus kind of fulfilling the role that Moses set up here. And I think, imagine reading the Old Testament here and never knowing about Jesus. If we know about Jesus and how Moses is just a shadow of what's to come with Jesus. Any thoughts from anybody on this? I'm getting pretty close to wrapping up here. Welcome anybody's participation. Okay, I want to try to compare the law that was given through the commandments and other parts of the Old Testament to grace. Let's take a look. I already jumped ahead to this a little bit, but I'm going to circle back to it. That Matthew 5, 17. I already read this, but it's basically Jesus saying, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish these things, but to fulfill them. So the law is not obsolete or done, or it's not like we can ignore all that now. It's fulfilled through Jesus. Yeah, a lot of the Levitical laws of, you can't wear a garment made out of two types of cloth and things like that. Those are, trying to think of some of the other more. Don't trim your hair. I'd look pretty rough. I cannot grow a beard. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of those that sometimes people will go and point to those and say, well, why don't you follow these? And I think it just kind of shows a shallowness of understanding the word. But again, the law is more to restrain sin and to reveal sin and reflect God's heart for our lives. Again, this is very fundamental Christian. I'm struggling with it a little bit because it's so fundamental, but it doesn't mean we can't look at it. The law doesn't save us. It's the grace of Jesus paying for our sins on the cross that saves us. But we still have to live in obedience and show obedience and our just respect for what Christ has done for us. Let's see. It really sets up the idea that, we have to be careful with the other side of it too. We talk about legalism, but then we can go too far with grace. Grace doesn't erase the law. It really kind of empowers us to respect it and to love it and to use it as a tool for better living. I'm going to start wrapping up here if anyone has any final thoughts. But, this is about mountains of the Bible. And when we think of mountains of the Bible, and Sinai is kind of it's really one of the biggest events of the Old Testament. And it kind of reveals God starting his covenant with his chosen people, his holiness, his foundation for ethical living, like you pointed out about the Egyptians probably. It's hard for us to imagine. This is what I always struggle with. Like the Israelites didn't have all these things written down, literally, when we talk about 10 Commandments in stone. Sometimes I think it's so hard to imagine a time where God's people didn't have that. So I guess I try to leave every class I teach with a challenge for the next week or however long. I'd just like you to challenge to go through and read the 10 Commandments sometimes this week. We talk about displaying the 10 Commandments in different places, and it ends up being legal fights here and there. But let's leave that behind and just actually read them ourselves this week. And there's 10 of them. It's seven days until next week. Just pick one or two the next couple days. If you miss a day, you got an extra couple days in there. If you do 2 a day, just pick 2 a day to kind of meditate on. Do you have any other gods before gods? Do you have any idols in your life? Do you have any hate for someone that's you're not murdering them, but you're thinking about them in a hateful way? And just pick a day, pick two a day to go through and work on. And I think spending some time doing that, even though sometimes we think, well, I've been a Christian for these many years. I know all the 10 Commandments. I'm looking at deeper stuff now. There's still a lot we can pull out of this. I don't know. Just thank God that He's given us the law to keep us within boundaries, and ask for the courage to live. God talks about His people being holy, set apart, and precious. Ask for the courage to live like that in today's world. Any final thoughts as we wrap this up? Might be a few minutes early. Yeah, I've been talking about the level a lot, sort of as a metaphor for this, but if you were holding that up to yourself for every time you got a little out of alignment, I'd probably have spun around several times already. So let's go ahead and close in prayer. Dale, would you mind?